Friday here in the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We've got Brian Batko. The Combine is next week, but the Steelers, while everyone's going to be looking at what they want to get in the draft, some people want them to make a big splash to answer their quarterback situation. We'll talk about that as well as talking about what defensive positions are going to be most important to the Steelers in the draft and whether or not there's some players on the roster that could kind of answer some of the positions of need who might not be known to Steelers fans. We'll discuss that all here in one of the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers, and we're here talking all things Pittsburgh Steelers today on this Friday episode that you can find on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday episodes of this show, the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our different sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Reminder, the show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today, and you'll see that they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are local, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. We have more on them later in a bit here. Brian, this is kind of an amalgamation of all the questions that we've been getting really since the Steelers ended their season with the loss to the Bills. And so many people, whether it's fans, whether it's national media, think the Steelers have to make a big splash at quarterback. And we've talked about different options. Ray and I talked about Russell Wilson on Wednesday. Justin Fields has been a point of conversation. You know, there's people thinking, what about Kirk Cousins, or trade for this quarterback or that quarterback? And all the while, it seems like the pushback from us doesn't, people don't understand why we haven't kind of committed to this idea that the Steelers are going to do this just yet. We're not saying they're not going to, but it just doesn't line up to me with the actions they've taken to build the roster the way they have, getting an Arthur Smith type of guy, rebuilding the offensive line, looking at the players that they did in the Senior Bowl. To me, everything screams they're trying to build up this roster around the quarterback position and just get steady play from there rather than trying to make the big splash at quarterback and still be dealing with a roster that has a lot of holes in it.
Yeah, we're not saying they're not going to. You never say never. And we're not saying they shouldn't, but we don't run the team. So we're trying to tell you what to expect from those who do. And you're right, Chris. They're sort of getting arrows from all angles this week. Peter King called it a colossal misjudgment of the QB situation if they don't make a splash, essentially. Warren Sharp, what did he say? They're unserious about the position or winning or what have you. And I think part of the divide there between, again, the national media is kind of telling you what they think the Steelers should do. We do that at times, but we also are trying to tell you what we think they will do. When you cover every team in the league, you sort of just look at 32 rosters, 32 depth charts, 32 quarterback situations, and weigh in on that accordingly. Whereas I think the Steelers, you've got to look at them organizationally, philosophically. And like I said, I'm not saying they aren't going to surprise everybody. They've made more aggressive moves in the last 5 years than a lot of people can remember. Since I've been on the beat, trading a first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick, that's unheard of in modern history for the Steelers. Moving up as much as they have and moving around in drafts isn't typical of them. Firing an offensive coordinator mid-season certainly is uncharted territory for this franchise. And yet that kind of, I'm going to use that as a point here to say what I'm saying. Even Matt Canada as offensive coordinator got a third season to try to prove his worth and show the Steelers, the ever patient, stable, valuing consistency Steelers, what he could or couldn't do. I know it's a little different, coach versus player. It's not apples to apples, but it does kind of tell you how they think generally, how patient they're willing to be. That's why I just don't think you're going to see them blow up the Kenny Pickett experiment soon.
Right.
I think he at least gets a third year, maybe not all of it like Canada, but I think they at least go into year 3 with him as their starting quarterback without the kind of QB2 who would throw this all into a state of chaos, essentially. But, that is a tough line to walk and a tough balance to strike, because I can also understand those who aren't in Pittsburgh and don't cover or think about the team on a daily basis saying, what is going on here, trying to keep pace in this division in the AFC North with this rather uninspiring, on paper at least, grouping of quarterbacks.
And I get that. Like, you look at the other talent in the division: Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and that there's stuff there. But the Steelers have found ways to beat those teams without those guys. They've won 3 of the last 4 against the Bengals with Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett as their starters. They've won.
Joe Burrow wasn't always in there. Let's
sure thing. And TJ Watt was missing for half a year, and no one gave the Steelers breaks for that. But also, even when Joe Burrow's been with the Bengals, like they've gone back and forth. It's not like the Bengals have dominated them during those stretches. They've won 7 of the last 8 against the Ravens. I think they've won 4 of the last 6 against the Browns. I may be making a misstep there, but they have done well. They've either hung with or done better than a lot of their division head to head. Now, overall season wise, the Bengals had Joe Burrow for those 2 years. In 2 of the 4 years that they've had him, they've been one of the best teams in the NFL. The Ravens won the division this past year. The Steelers haven't won the division since 2020, and there's certainly concerns.
And in that year, the Browns ran them out of the playoffs on a rail, albeit with a quarterback who to your blue in the face about whether that's good for the long-term health of that franchise, but still,
yeah, that would be also Baker Mayfield to the Steelers. Is that another free agent quarterback we should be talking about? We're not even going to go down that road. But point being is that even with obvious problems on this team, cornerback questions, linebacker questions, offensive line questions, there's been a lot of issues that have come up, and injury concerns. This past year, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, Pat Freiermuth, Deontay Johnson, all major players who were on injured reserve, and the Steelers still found a way to make the playoffs, even without that stellar quarterback play that people are clamoring for. I just think the Steelers and what they're trying to do right now, they're trying to put themselves in the position so that they have the complete roster. When the Chiefs got Patrick Mahomes, they didn't do so because they were the worst team in all of the NFL. They had the 27th pick of the draft that year. They traded up to the 10th spot because they had a complete roster. They said, you know what? We like our O-line. We like our weapons. We like our defense. Let's go get a quarterback and put it together. And lo and behold, a couple of years after that, they were Super Bowl champions. Not that that's the ultimate model for how everyone needs to work, but I think that you take your shot when you can afford to take that shot. I just don't think the Steelers are in a place where even if they get a quarterback that they're taking a big risk on, they still have to fill center, tackle, corner, linebacker, and all these other positions. And that's why I'm on the side of I don't think that splash is coming right now. Maybe next year or the year after, but not right now.
Well, they're already kind of doing it ass backwards, right? Because they used the first round pick on a quarterback a couple years ago when they didn't have this roster kind of set up to just plop a rookie in there and say, okay, now you can be sort of that missing piece. And I get it. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Number one, picking 20th, there's probably go 2 more decades before you're picking 20th and you get the first quarterback off the board.
Right.
It says as much about the draft class as it does your decision to do it, but still that was something that had to be on their minds too. We know the familiarity factor with Kenny Pickett. I'm not one of those people who necessarily thinks if he went to NC State, they wouldn't have picked him. But I mean, that had to have been. And the Steelers have even said, their comfort with knowing him as well as they did helped allow them to make that pick. And just in general at quarterback, it's been a weird 4 or 5 years. I think a lot of reasonable people can agree Ben Roethlisberger probably stayed too long. Mm-hmm. The 2019 injury to him, sapped him of a lot of his arm talent and ability. He still had the smarts and the savvy to ride it out and help bring them that AFC North title in 2020 that you mentioned when they started 11-0. But for the long-term view of the franchise, when you start to get into how are you going to strike while the iron's hot with guys like TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick in their prime and Cam Hayward kind of coming down to the bottom of the hourglass, well, the timing wasn't great there in terms of the late stage Ben Roethlisberger that you got. So I understand that there's a lot of extenuating circumstances, but I think this does point to why a lot of people in the 2022 draft were saying, just because it's the biggest hole on your roster at the moment, does it really make sense to get a quarterback right now, or should you have maybe a little bit more infrastructure before you try to thread that needle?
I'm right with you there.
And I don't know if it's time to thread that needle either. You might just have to, like I said, and what I think they're going to do, and maybe even what I would do, because I tend to lean toward patience as well. And I understand that for these guys running this team, it's a business. It is an everyday 24/7 thing. You have to lie in your bed with the decisions that you make. It's not as easy as people on the outside saying, all right, let's just click Kenny from QB1 to QB2 and plug in veteran X and roll. I don't think it's that simple for them with the personal dynamics involved. So I think they will go into year 3 with Pickett. And at that point, I don't know how long the leash would be, 4, 5, 6 games, half a year. And then if it doesn't start to trend upward in a big way, then you start thinking about hitting that reset button.
I hear you on that. I think that's the reasonable plan there. We got more talk here. We're going to look at the defensive players in this draft class, or more specifically, what the Steelers could be targeting the most in this draft class, because there's a few different classes that could be really interesting. All that here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stick with us. We got a lot more to discuss. But first, want to remind you this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, there are over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local area. 80 of those local beers are available on tap, and they're always switching new ones in and out so that you get a new experience every single time. You want to try different types of beers, there's no better place to do so than Mike's Beer Bar. But also, they have over 20 televisions. So if you want to go and watch a great sporting event while you're there, they have it, and they can also even reserve television for you for your specific game. No matter how obscure you think that sport is, they will find it and get it on that television. Also, they have great food like Steak on a Stone, where you choose your choice cut of steak. It's brought to you on a heated stone, and every time you cut off a piece, you press it into that stone, and you can get your piece of steak every single bite. How well done you want it every single time. It's Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh, on the North Shore on Federal Street, right across the street from PNC Park. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today, and when you get there, tell them Chris sent you. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.